Él brinda discursos inspiradores, compartiendo historias de innovación, disrupción y afrontando los retos de crear nuevos productos y servicios. En los últimos años también ha producido varias películas, así como el documental sobre la vida de la Premio Nobel de la Paz Shirin Ebadi, que recordemos se estrenó en el Festival de Cine de Venecia en el 2022. Su conferencia lleva el nombre de Cultura de Innovación, Nacimiento y Auge de Netflix. Le damos la bienvenida. Mitch, welcome to América Digital. It's a pleasure to greet you.
Hola. Yo hablo poco español. Mi esposa es venezolana, pero ella no habla inglés, so necesito hablar. Pero es bien por una relación. Cuando tú tienes guerras, no entendí nada. But I need to do this in English, so I apologize for that. But I am very happy to be here. I'm excited to share both the story of Netflix, but more importantly, the culture of innovation that over and over again led Netflix to outcompete major studios and other companies. Because it wasn't a straight line, everything wasn't always successful. Now, we started the company, it's unbelievable, 27 years ago. And if you remember that time, there was no smartphones. There was no smart TVs. We measured bandwidth in kilobytes, not megabytes or gigabytes. In fact, I think the average rate of a modem was 14,000, not millions. Just miles down from where we opened our office was an office of a new company called Google. Their office was like not maybe 2 times the size of this stage. I mean, it was 4 or 5 people. Amazon had opened 2 years prior to this, and it only sold books. That's all it did. It was an online store for books. And its advertising, the way they acquired customers, was on the radio. Does anybody remember the radio? Like it's like ancient history. So it was a different world. And what I'm going to walk through here is some of these pivots, but like I said, more importantly, what led to some of these changes? What led to some of these innovations? And for the first 20 years, we went from being pretty much a DVD rental store. We rented movies, we sold movies, all the way up for the next 20 years, becoming one of the major studios. And along the way, there was a number of kind of major pivots, some of them smaller than others. But the company went from a la carte rental. You paid $5 for a 1-week rental. Eventually, we got to subscription, later on streaming, and then eventually becoming a studio. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, in fact, as recently as yesterday, there was an announcement of a whole new pivot, a whole new added stream of revenue for Netflix. But you may not know this, but Netflix didn't start out with DVDs. We actually wanted to be an entertainment gossip site. Where are you going to find out who's starring in new movies? What was the gossip about relationships between the stars? We thought, okay, this internet thing is so exciting, but no one knew, where it was going. No one knew what you could do. Remember, there was just barely starting to be photos. There was no moving video, and of course, there was no social media. So we started out like that, and I remember one of the first promotions we did, because we were trying to get people to come to our site so we could sell advertising. A friend of mine came to me and said, Bill Clinton, the president, has been caught having sex in the White House with an intern. And he was going to be questioned by Congress and it was going to be live and broadcast. And he said, because that's the government, it's all public domain, we could make a video, a DVD of that interview. So we did. About 24 hours later, we had a big page on the Wall Street Journal that said, we're selling this DVD for 2 cents, for 2 pennies. And we sold 25,000 copies. And we thought, wow, DVD is really going to be big. What we didn't know is the Duplicator, the company that made our DVDs, those 25,000, also made porn. And they mixed 200 copies of a porn movie into those 25,000. And we sent them out. Not a good start. We sent an email to all our customers saying, here's the address, send them back to you, we'll reimburse your 2 cents. And we never got one of those back. They're actually a collector's item if you ever find one. So from there, what we started to do is we wanted to do a video store pretty much just like Blockbuster or others on the internet. You could choose your movies. And our first big innovation was this envelope that would hold the DVD, and for less than $1, we could send it to you, and it included the postage back to us. And typically the country was 1 to 3 days before you would get the movie. And the way we got customers is we put a coupon inside every DVD player sold in the country. But it wasn't subscription. This was, you would get 8 free rentals, you might get 10 free rentals, and then after that you would pay $5 for a week of rentals. And we thought, okay, this is a business. But the problem was, every time a customer would use up the free rentals, they would never come back. So we were challenged to try to figure out what to do next. We learned from looking at the analytics that our customers in the one-day ship, where they would order the film and get it in 1 day, was much higher than 3 days. So San Francisco Bay Area, where we started, that was the fast-growing market. But other parts of the country were much lower. We accidentally overheard in a focus group where we were asking our customers, so what do you like about Netflix? What do you don't like? The focus group was over, and a young man from Denver walked out, and we overheard him talking to someone, and he said, I was in the mood for an action film, but when I got it, 3 days later, I wanted something else. That one accidental conversation changed the whole mantra of the company. From that day on, everything was focused on speed of delivery. How can you shorten the amount of time from the time you order to the time you receive it? And today that seems like obvious, but to us at the time, we didn't quite know. So we started all these projects. We started building mini warehouses where we could ship the DVDs. We built kiosks where you could pick them up and drop them off. And nothing worked except for building these warehouses. So we got about 80% of the country within a one-day ship. And things were going good. Things were moving along, but like I said, customers would use the service and rarely come back. I mean, some of them would, but most not. And at the time, we weren't all that different. In fact, we had some positives, against the 25,000 video stores that were in the US, Blockbuster being the biggest with 5,000 locations. But, you could go and pick up a movie from them. We had pretty much the same selection. And we thought, we've got to become partners with a big chain like Blockbuster. So we invited them, and we were, of course, running out of money. In 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, so every internet company was going out of business. So we called up Blockbuster, and we said, why don't you come up and see our operation? We'll, show you how it works. We'll take you to our warehouse because we'd like to form a partnership, and we'll sell you half of the company. So they came up, they brought up their CEO, their CFO, a few others, and they looked around and said, there's nothing special here, we could do this. It's kind of a common phrase you hear from very successful companies' leadership. So I thought, well, let's take them to the warehouse. Let's show them this sophisticated way we sort and mail these DVDs out. And we had just bought from the US Post Office a mail sorter. I don't know if you've seen them, but the mail shoots through it, they read the barcode and sort it so you get the least expensive rate. So this thing is about 15 meters long. And we fired it up, we wanted to show them, and the problem was all the DVDs were flying all over the place. And one of the warehouse guys said, well, if we're gonna show it, we can't let them see that. So he cut a hole in the warehouse wall, and we put the end of it through it so they wouldn't sit, we fired it up, and one of them said, what's that noise I hear through the other side of the wall? But in the end, they laughed at us and they said, if this is such a good business, we're going to do it ourselves. It was devastating for us, especially since we were running out of money. Now, one day shortly after that, about 7 of us were in the warehouse. And the warehouse was millions of DVDs, very sophisticated. They were in shoeboxes, alphabetical. I mean, it was as tough, finding a DVD was running all over the warehouse. And Reed Hastings, the CEO, looked at us and said, what are all these DVDs doing here in the warehouse? They're not earning us any money. Figure out a way to move the inventory into people's homes. And so we, every team got together, we strategized, we brainstormed, and we came up with this idea of subscription. You pay us at the time $20 a month. You would get 4 movies. You could keep them as long as you wanted, but every time you sent one back, we would send you a new one instead of this $5 a night. We developed other kinds of tactics to it, but we launched that and people loved it. It was that classic, the company just took off, like a hockey stick. Everything went up to the right. But meanwhile, we had millions of customers using the a la carte and also people buying. And one of the toughest decisions we had to make was, do we do both or do we focus on one? And I remember sitting around the executive team, and Reed, who was a genius CEO, said, you know what? We have got to do the one thing we can do better than anyone else. And no one was doing subscription. Cable services, yes, but no video stores. So we jettisoned the a la carte business, we jettisoned sales, we even were advertising at the time and sold that, or got rid of that, and focused on subscription. And things went on for about 3 or 4 years like that. We developed algorithms for helping you find a good movie. Like I said, we developed the queue. All kinds of interesting ways to encourage people to consume more. And then the idea of being able to stream content came up as a potential possibility. Now, if you go back to this time, remember there was no smart TVs, there was no way to connect the internet to your TV. You could only watch it on your laptop. And we thought, that's not going to be very satisfactory. So we hired a couple of engineers, and we developed this box that you see with the Netflix logo. This was a box that would convert the internet signal and go into the cable that was on your television. And we went to all the electronic stores, we went to the shows. We tried to convince people that this was going to be a successful product. And no one wanted it. No, everybody said, people are not going to watch, something that comes to your big television. They want DVDs, they want to go to movie theater. So we let go of those engineers. Lo and behold, a few years later, those engineers founded a company called Roku. Pretty bad idea for us to get rid of this group. But the important thing here is that Netflix had an incredibly successful and profitable DVD subscription business at the time. And doing streaming was going to totally cannibalize that business. But Netflix was not afraid to look 5 and 10 years out, knowing it would destroy their existing business in order to protect the future. And that mindset and that culture within the company was critical to not be afraid of introducing new innovations. Blockbuster, of course, didn't do it. And as I go through here, you'll see many, many other companies preserve their current business, but didn't survive all the innovation that other companies did. Now, during this period of time, it got really interesting. All the different ways people consumed entertainment, taught everybody, new ways to promote, new ways to put movies in front of people. One of the crazy things is, and this changed a couple years ago, is people could share their account. People could give their password to their kids, to their wife, to other members of the family. And I had an experience one time. My kids were going to college. My youngest son, Emiliano, was going to the University of Colorado. And I looked and I had 4 accounts. And I go, wait a minute, I don't need 4 accounts. So I started canceling them. I knew my kids were on one account because I had, I think, 7 people could share it. So I started canceling accounts. It wasn't more than 15 minutes before my son called and said, Dad, what are you doing? You're canceling the account. And I said, but you're not using it. And he goes, no, but all my friends are calling me. I gave them your password, so I've got, everybody calling me. And at Netflix realized that this was an incredible driver of loyalty. If you give, it's counterintuitive because you think, geez, you're losing money, you're giving away the service for free. But what it did is it locked in people who knew they were getting incredible value. Now, over the last 2 years, limiting that has been a great driver of revenue. And it's a great example of preserving a future revenue stream, but using the loyalty factor in the short term. Another really interesting thing that shows kind of the broad, innovative culture at Netflix was, I don't know if you know this, if you see this, but in many companies, when somebody has an idea, oftentimes people will say, oh, we've thought about that before, it's not a good idea. Or someone will be too shy to say they have an idea. Some of the biggest and most important innovations at Netflix came from people who were running the front office, another one from a guy in the warehouse, because no one made fun or embarrassed people who would come up with ideas no matter how crazy. And one person came in who worked as an administrator in the front office one day and said, you know, I was watching this series and I got to the end of it and I wanted to watch the next episode, but I had to push stop, back, search, play. Why can't it just immediately go to the next episode? Today it seems so obvious, but that one change created so many loyal fans of Netflix. It just made it a more enjoyable experience. Another guy from the warehouse said, well, you know, every time I'm watching one episode after another, I have to keep listening to that theme music. I'm going crazy. I can't hear the Stranger Things theme song over and over. And he said, well, why not put skip intro? Things that seem so obvious, but they all came from employees who were not afraid to come up with ideas. And that changed the whole loyalty structure of the company. Now, a few years later, it really kind of started in 2011 to 2013. Netflix first launched its content creation unit. Because remember those red envelopes, the first Netflix studio was called Red Envelope, and it failed miserably. I think the best piece of content was a National Geographic of Afghanistan, and no one watched any of this. But a few years later, to differentiate, at this point, everybody had the same content. Everybody had Disney movies, and everybody had Marvel, and everybody had, the kind of content that people wanted. And Netflix thought, well, to differentiate ourselves, we need to become a studio. And they started investing in building more and more content and just got better and better at that. And that ended up being a way to be competitive against Disney and other studios. By the way, Netflix had 10-year deals with Disney and Paramount and others, and they all expired 2 years ago, and lo and behold, Disney Plus came out, Paramount Plus, and that's why, because prior to that, they couldn't release their own content. It was for Netflix. Now, you can see this investment is growing dramatically. This year, it's expected to be over $20 billion. That means that there is sometimes in a single month, 20 or 30 new shows coming out, each with multiple episodes. This is still less than Disney. Disney is investing about $30 billion. So even though it's a lot of money, it's still not, quite at the level of Disney. The exciting part for me especially is this expansion internationally. There are now Netflix units all over the world. And what I see as exciting is content made in one area of the world has now become popular in a completely surprising other part of the world. An example is the Mexican novellas are incredibly popular in Korea. They can't get enough of them. And so you're seeing this kind of cross-pollination of content where never before did people have that kind of access. And for someone who loves entertainment, that's just kind of created a renaissance of new shows and new content out there. But Netflix isn't finished. Even though it's a couple 100 million subscribers, there's hundreds of millions of people who can't afford Netflix. And so last year, they launched AVOD, which is advertising supported service. So you pay less, but you have to watch ads. And it's growing pretty dramatically. In fact, the fastest growing streaming businesses are AVOD services. you'll see them popping up everywhere. Pluto TV and Freevee and many others. Amazon bought Freevee, Free TV. And this is appealing to people who, I don't mind a few advertisements here and there. It's kind of how TV used to be. And so this is a pivot that happened last year and is growing. The other idea is taking games and taking movies or TV shows and creating game content. You can now play the Queen's Gambit game on Netflix. You can play a Stranger Things game. And gaming, I think probably all of you know, is actually a bigger business than movies and TV shows. It's about $180 billion worldwide. So Netflix sees this evolving market, and instead of waiting for the bandwidth to be there, because still today there is not the ability to have two-way through Netflix, but they're getting there. So you see this effort to expand into gaming to appeal to young people. Also sports. Everybody, Apple TV, it's kind of like, between Apple TV, Disney, and Netflix, they're all saying, well, how can we be different? What can we do? So all at the same time, they all got into games, they all got into AVOD, and now they're all getting into sports. Netflix recently signed a deal that is $120 million a year for just 2 games played on Christmas of NFL games. But that's just the beginning. They're aspiring to license a lot more sports. And sports, has a whole nother angle to it. It's typically live, and you appeal to a whole new market. I think this is pretty crazy, but you can now go to a Netflix restaurant and have experience the food that you might have seen in a TV series. But it gets even bigger than that. In this kind of one-upsmanship with Disney, Disney, of course, has theme parks all over the world, Disneyland, and of course Universal Studios does. Well, yesterday, Netflix announced they're opening 2 big theme parks where you can experience, I think one in Philadelphia, maybe one in Dallas, I think, where you can experience these you can walk in and sit on the sets that are duplicates. But again, this is a whole new evolution of where Netflix is headed. Imagine in the future where, goggles are more prevalent, you'll be able to do your browsing by entering a TV show set, maybe even interacting with some of the stars of the film, interacting with other fans, and picking your movies and your TV shows that way. So there is still so much more to go. And again, all these ideas come from the employees. They're all encouraged to make recommendations. Now, it was kind of sad, but last year, Netflix mailed out its last DVD. While it had moved into the streaming business, it split off the DVD and called it DVD.com. And they mailed millions and millions of DVDs over the year. But last year, that ended. The subscribers, of course, continued to grow. You would think, 230, 240 million paying subscribers is a pretty big number. But when you look around the world, it's still not the biggest. There are 4 or 5 companies that have more exposure, have more customers than Netflix, Disney being one. So there's still a whole lot more to do. Now, this always, you always ask yourself, well, who is it appealing to? What is the new trends? And while people's interest in content is changing. In fact, our attention span is getting shorter and shorter. People are not interested in sitting for 2 hours in a movie theater as much as they are watching a couple of TikToks. And I would imagine in the future, we're going to see, people make episodes in the 2 to 5 minute range that you can string together, 100 of them. It kind of reminds me about binge watching. I don't know, has anybody ever started an episode and 4 hours later you're still watching? Anybody binge watch ever? I mean, it's caused a problem for a lot of employers. People are coming to work, after staying up and red eyes, trying to come into work. But the whole future of entertainment is really kind of driven by consumers' changing interest. They still want stories. They want to fall in love with the characters. They definitely want to be able to watch and consume anywhere they are, whether they're at a bus stop or at work or at home. But their attention span is getting so short, the movement is towards this shorter content. Now, you might ask yourself, why didn't some of these companies, these major studios, form streaming services? Why didn't Blockbuster buy half of Netflix? We had offered them half for $50 million. And we were ready to negotiate. That was just our starting price. They could have gotten it for 20. They're now, of course, out of existence. In fact, the last Blockbuster store is an Airbnb up in Washington, where you can go in and spend the night and experience what it was like to be in the 90s renting movies. But over and over again, some of the big players failed to recognize opportunity. Why didn't Hilton Hotels start Airbnb? Why did they leave it to 2 engineers who couldn't pay their rent and wanted to rent air mattresses? That's where the Airbnb comes from. Who would rent air mattresses on their living room floor for $10 a night? Hilton, Marriott, they should have founded it. Why didn't Hertz found Uber and Lyft? It's this mindset of preserving your existing business and not looking in the future. And that is the key, and the willingness to risk, the future. There's all kinds of public statements. This was the CEO of Blockbuster at the time, who said, that Redbox, which was a company that I was president of, it was a kiosk company. We did about $1.5 billion a year in revenue. But he basically said, these are nothing. And he told me personally, we'll just compete with you when the business is right. But the even more sad one is Scott Ballmer, who was the president of Microsoft. He said, Google is just a house of cards. That's, by the way, a good title for a TV series, House of Cards. I think I've heard that somewhere. But this is something I would encourage all of you to do as you become more and more successful, more and more entrenched, and as you're focusing on the profits and the quarterly results. Always keep in mind that some small upstart company can come and take your business away. It's easier today than it ever has been before. And that cycle that used to be 5 years long, used to be 10 years long, is now a year. People can put together a few ideas and do your business faster and better and cheaper than you. So you always have to look at the possibilities of the future. At Netflix, what we tried to instill was 2 or 3 really important mantras. And the first one is know your customer. And that's why Netflix employees always had to pay for the service. They didn't get a special hotline. So all the problems our customers faced, they felt too. So from that, they could make recommendations. They would say, I really don't like the way the billing occurs. I really don't like the fact I can't call customer service. That's where the best ideas came from. So, making sure that you actually use your product or use it as much as you can will help you develop innovation and things that you can do where you won't get disrupted, because your competitors are trying to find the weaknesses in your system. Next is this idea of context, not control. And what that means is every employee could make decisions, could try to fulfill their goals, but no one would none of the higher ups or managers or VPs would tell them how to do it. They needed to have the pride of ownership. They knew what we needed, but they weren't told how to do it. And that ownership created this passion for trying to figure things out. No executive ever came up with a good idea. It was all from the team. Now, customers also gave a lot of recommendations, but almost all of the really good ideas came from the employees. So, creating this confidence with your team that they can blurt out a stupid idea and not get laughed at. It's incredibly important. And lastly, leadership. Leadership has got to, and I love this quote from Saint-Exupéry, who also wrote The Little Prince. And he said, if you want to build a ship, teach your team to yearn for the endless sea. And that's the whole idea. Get them passionate about the future. Get them passionate about what you want to achieve. And then let them go and figure it out. Well, thank you very much.